We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Chesam and Beis in Mesechet Kesuvos. This is Kesuvos Daf 58b. The Gemara here continues, Elul Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, but according to Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, Kamaisa Misham Simfon, Uvas Raisa Misham Simfon, both the Mishnah Rishona and the Mishnah Achrona are both the exact same reason. It's because he might find that she has a blemish and then he'll back out of the marriage. It doesn't make sense that they would have a ruling because of Simfon and then have a different ruling again for the same reason. And so the Gemara answers, no, my beinayu, what's the difference between the Mishnah Rishona and the Mishnah Achrona? The difference is, let's say he inspects her, so to speak, on the outside. He asks her relatives about her. Is that really considered sufficient? One says that when he does that kind of investigation, that's a real investigation, that's good enough. And the Mishnah Achrona says, no, that's not considered a good enough investigation. Therefore, only when they actually go to chuppah, only at that point in time will she be able to eat shruma. Rashi over here explains, Elul Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda Damar le'el nami tam Mishnah Rishona misham simfon. Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda said that the reason of the Mishnah Rishona, that was saying that the reason why an arusa is not allowed to have truma and they have to wait till the time for the wedding arrives, that's because of simfon, because again, he might back out of the marriage because of blemishes that he finds. V'hashta nami muki tam bezin shel acharei misham simfon. But now he's saying that the reason of the Mishnah Achrona is also because of simfon. That's why we have to wait for the actual chuppah, and it's not even good enough the time that the wedding arrives. So that's what the Gemara says. My beinayu, what's the difference? Kolomar, what the Gemara means to say is as follows: Maro rishonim lahatiram higiyas man va'elach, umaro achronim lamar tikanis lachuppah. Why is it that the Mishnah Rishona said that we're allowing it from the time of the wedding? That's good enough. Simfon says you have to wait till the time for the wedding arrives. But then suddenly the Mishnah Achrona said, no, that's not good enough. The same exact reason Simfon says that you have to wait until the actual chuppah. And the Gemara answered, Marsav, our Mishnah Rishona, the first Mishnah holds, Bedikas chutz shebodka biad krovosav, when he goes and inspects and he asks the relatives, what's going on over here with her? Is there anything I should be concerned about? So Shema Bedika, that's considered a good investigation. V'kodem sheyot and therefore he's already done a sufficient investigation. We're not afraid of simfon. Once the time for the wedding arrives, that is good enough. The Mishnah Achrona, the later Bezin, said no, it's not really considered a good bedika until he's actually with her, until he actually goes to chuppah. Only at that point in time do we say that he's done a sufficient bedika, and only then can she have truma. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hamakdish Maisi Yadayishto. Let's say a person sanctifies. He says it's hektish, that which his wife produces, her earnings. Harezu Osav Ochelas, so she can earn and she can consume it. It is not going to be hektish. Hamoser, but let's say she produces extra. So the extra amount, Rabbi Meir Omer hektish. Rabbi Meir says it is hektish. Rabbi Yochanan Asandler Omer chulin. Rabbi Yochanan Asandler says it is not hektish, it is chulin. And Rashi over here explains, Maisi Yadayishto, again the earnings of his wife. B'masnisin mefarish mahi mishkal chamish saloim v'chulu. It says later on in the Mishnah, there's a specific amount that the wife produces that goes to the husband. Her earnings go to the husband, so that is the specific amount we're talking about in terms of the fact that it is not hektish. And again, anything beyond that, that's a machlokas Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yochanan Hasan. The Rashi continues, Harezu osav ochelas ein ma'aseh yodea kadosh. It means that her earnings are not kadosh. Al piv, based on his pronouncement, uvegemara mefarshla. The Gemara will explain. Now, hamoser, again, if there's anything extra, hikdish as moser, maisi yadei. Let's say he says whatever she makes beyond that specific amount, I'm making it hekdish. Mashi yoselo yoser alaroy, what she produces more than the normal amount, shapasku chachamim, that the chachamim said. V'lo hikdish maisi yadei atzman, he didn't say that the actual earnings, that which she produces, is going to be hekdish. V'hamoser kani lo b'ma kesef shetiknu lo chachamim. Now, Rashi here explains that extra he also gets. Why does he get that extra part of the earnings? That's because of the ma kesef that the chachamim said goes to her. Sheyitin la b'chol Shabbos ma kesef. Every Shabbos she would get a ma kesef letzorchea for her own needs. Levad ha-mezonos, that's besides the mezonos, kiritanan b'masnisin, like it says in the Mishnah. In other words, the fact that her earnings go to the husband, that's in exchange for the regular mezonos, and the fact that the extra earnings goes to the husband, that's in exchange for the ma kesef that she gets every week. Rabbi Meir Omer hektish mefarish b'Gemara. Meir says it is hektish again, and that will be explained in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. Rav Huna says, the Rav says, Yechola isha lomer lebala eini nizonis v'eino osa. A wife is able to say to her husband, I don't want you to support me, and then my earnings will not go to you. She's allowed to say that she keeps her own earnings, and she won't take the mizonos. And the Gemara now says, Kasava Rav Huna holds, Kitakinu Rabbanan Mizone Ikur Maisa Yodem Mishum Eva. When the Rabbanan instituted this exchange over here, where she gets mizonos and the earnings go to the husband, so really the mizonos, that's the Ikur. The main thing is that the mizonos goes to her, and then we say that her earnings go to her husband, because otherwise there's going to be hatred. He's going to say, why am I supporting her? But she also gets to keep her earnings. And therefore, the real takana was for her benefit. And therefore, when she says, Eini nizonis ve'eini osa, she says, I don't want the support, and I don't want my earnings to go to my husband. Harishos biyada, that's perfectly allowed. That makes sense. Rashi over here says, Eini nizonis mishalach, I don't want to get mizonis from you. Ve'eini osa l'cha klum el aliyatzim, I'm not doing anything from you, it's all going to me. Mizone ikr means to say the mizonos was the main takana. Tchilas takanta l'tova, so the whole takana was for her benefit. Tiknua, that's the reason why they made this exchange. Mishum dezimnin delo safka v'maisa yadela mizonos, because sometimes her earnings is not enough to cover her mizonos. V'tiknu tchila ikr takanta sheyazon esishto, so the main takana was a husband has to support his wife. V'hadar tikan lo maisa yadem mishum eva, and then they said, you know what, her earnings go to the husband, otherwise it will create hatred. V'kevan d'ikr takanta l'tova, so since the whole takana was for her benefit, umishum dido it's for her. She says, I don't want it, I want to keep my earnings. That is perfectly okay. So that's what Rav Huna is saying, that Rav says, again, the main takana is for her. If she doesn't want the takana, if she wants to keep the earnings, it's perfectly fine. And so the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have the following question. It says, Tiknu mizonos tachas ma'aseyoda. It says mizonos is an exchange for her earnings. That sounds like the exact opposite of what Rav Huna just said. It sounds like her earnings go to her husband. That's the first part of the takana. And then we say that, in exchange for that, she gets the mizonos. And to that the Gemara says you'll have to amend it. Ema, rather, it should have said as follows, Tiknu ma'aseyoda tachas mizonos. That her earnings are instead of the mizonos. In other words, the mizonos is the ikr, and then should the earnings go to the husband for that reason, because she gets the mizonos, so therefore in order to avoid Eva, the earnings go to her husband. That's how Rav Huna will explain that. And the Gemara says, Leima Messiah, let us say a support for Rav Huna's position, again, that a woman is allowed to say, I want to keep my own earnings, and then I won't take the mizonos. And this is a proof from our Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Hamakdish Maisi Deishto, again, the husband, he sanctifies the earnings of his wife. Harehi Osav Yochelas, she can earn and she can keep what she's producing. And so therefore it seems to be over here that he's not entitled, he has no rishus over her earnings. And so the Gemara says, my lav, isn't this talking binizonis? It's talking about a situation where he has the ability to support her, and she's effectively saying that I don't want your support. And so the Gemara says, Lo no, b'she'ena nizonis. It could be what we're talking about over here is where he doesn't even have the means to support her at all. There is no mizonos, and that's why he has no right to her earnings. And the Gemara says, I b'she'ena nizonis, but 1 second. If she's not even being supported at all, if that's not even an option that's on the table for her, my lamemra, what's even the chiddush? Of course she keeps her earnings if he's not doing his part. And the Gemara explains, Afilu laman do'amar, even according to the one who says, Yachol harav lomar la'eved, that a master can say to a slave, Aseh imi, work for me ve'eni zonchan, I won't support you. That's only true by a slave. Hanimili be'evid kanani deloksib be'imach. That's true by an evid kanani where it doesn't use the word imach with you. Aval evid ivri dechsib be'imach, but by an evid ivri, by a Jewish slave where it says imach, lo, he can't say that. V'chol shekein ishto, certainly he can't say that to his wife. So of course, if he's not even providing her with the requisite mizonos, of course he has no right to her earnings. So that would not be a chiddush at all. So what would be the purpose of the Mishnah even saying that? And to that the Gemara answers, Seifa tzrichla, you're right. But according to that, really the whole chiddush of the Mishnah is not the first part. That's obvious that she keeps her earnings if he's not even able to provide her mizonos. But the chiddush is the end of the Mishnah. By Moser, by the extra, let's say she produces more than the requisite amounts. Rabbi Meir Omer Hektish, there it's a machlokas tanoim. Rabbi Meir says Hektish, Rabbi Yochanan Hasanler Omer Chulin, and Rabbi Yochanan Hasanler says Chulin. That machlokas tanoim already is a chiddush, and that would be the purpose of the Mishnah. And Rashi over here explains, Maila b'nizonis, aren't we talking about a situation of nizonis, which means to say sheyesh lo nechasa, meaning he has property, umevakesh lazun, and he's trying to support her, so he really should get her earnings. Ve'afilu achitnan ein ma'aseh yadeh b'reshus l'akdishan, and still is not in his reshus, so apparently Rav Huna is correct that she can say, I don't want your mizonis, and I'll keep the earnings. And the Gemara answered, no, b'she'ena nizonis, the case is he can't even support her. She'ein lo b'mel lazuna, he has nothing to support her with, therefore he's not giving her mizonos, so of course, again, she's entitled to her earnings. And Rashi over here continues, Seif Itzrich Le, the Chiddush would be the Seif of the Mishnah, Le'ashminan Plugsa b'Moser. It's to tell us this Machlokas Tanoim by, let's say, she produces more than the requisite amount. The Lo Shayach HaMezonos, that's not really related to the Mezonos. V'Afagav De'ein HaMezonos, even though he doesn't have the means to support her. Ikol HaMan Domer Kadosh, La'achar Misa Kashir Shana. Still, there's a Man Domer that says that he can sanctify that extra is going to be Kadosh after she dies when he inherits her, Uchid L'Kamon, as we'll explain later on. And the Gemara continues, Upliga de Reish Lakish, and Rav Huna, he argues on Reish Lakish. Rav Huna, who says that a woman can say, I don't want your mezonos, and I want to keep my earnings, that argues on Reish Lakish. The Yomar Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish says, Lo Teima Taima de Rabbi Meir. Don't say that the reason of Rabbi Meir, again, Rabbi Meir said that the extra part is Kadosh. Don't say that the reason of Rabbi Meir is, Mishum de Kasavar Adam Makdish Davar Shalo Bali Olam, because Rabbi Meir holds that a person can sanctify something that doesn't yet exist. Maybe you'll say, that's the pshat, the earnings don't exist yet. And yet Rabbi Meir is saying that the husband's able to be makdish. That's not the explanation of Rabbi Meir. Elatayim de Rabbi Meir, rather the reason of Rabbi Meir is as follows. Since he's able to force her to give him her earnings, so Nasika Omer Lo, therefore it's as if he says to her, Yikdashu Yadayach Lo Seim, your hands are holy, everything that your hands produce, your hands themselves, so to speak, are kadosh, and everything they produce will be hektish, and therefore you see within the explanation of Reish Lakish that the idea is the husband has the ability to force her to work on his behalf, and therefore it seems that Reish Lakish holds she's not allowed to say, I don't want your mezonos and I want to keep all my earnings. That is not a possibility. As Rashi over here says, Davar Shelo Bali Olam Kagon Maisi Yodeh, you could have said that the idea was her earnings are a Davar Shelo Bali Olam, Sheikdishan Ad Shelo Asas, and he's making them hektish before they've even been produced. But that's not the reason. Leo saying Lamisha Baran, meaning your hands are holy to the Creator. V'yodayim Isnu Bolam, and her hands, they do exist. In any case, what do you see? Alma, we see Kasavar that Reish Lakish holds Yachol Lachufa, he can force her to produce for him. Ve'ena Yachol Lomar Eini Nizonis Ve'eniosa. Apparently, the wife is not allowed to say, I don't want to be supported, and my earnings will not go to my husband, but rather he can say, I want your earnings. I can force you to give me your earnings. But the Gemara continues, but that's not what the husband said to her. He didn't say to her that your hands are going to be holy. So how is it that we're reinterpreting his words to mean that? And so the Gemara answers, Kavan de Shamina Leila Rabbi Meir, since we know that Rabbi Meir, the Amar that Rabbi Meir says, Eino de Motzi Devar V'Levatol, a person doesn't say words that have no meaning, that have no application. Nase Ka'omer Lo Yikdashu Yadayach Lo Seim. So it's as if he said Yikdashu Yadayach Lo Seim, even though he didn't use that phrase. Still, that's what it means to say. As Rashi over here says, he didn't say your hands are holy. He said your earnings are holy, and that's lo bali olam. And to that the Gemara says, Shamina leila Rabbi Meir Mesechet Erchin. We heard Rabbi Meir has this opinion in Erchin. Damar eina demotzi devar v'levatola. He says a person doesn't say something with no application. The Tanan hamarich pachos mi ben chodesh. Rabbi Meir Omer no sin damav the adam yodea shein erech lepachos mi ben chodesh. Person understands that there is no erech, there is no fixed value for somebody less than a month old. And therefore, v'gamar v'yamar l'shem damim. Therefore, it must mean he's not talking about erchin over there. It must mean he's talking about the damim, just the value. Let's say that you would sell that person on the slave market. Hachanami here also. Adam yodea she'en adam makdish davar shelo bali olam. It's known that a person can't sanctify something that doesn't exist. V'gamar v'yamar l'shem yodayim atzman. So we can reinterpret it to mean that he's sanctifying the yodayim. But the Gemara continues, V'savar Rabbi Meir ein adam makdish davar shelo bali olam. But does Rabbi Meir really hold that a person cannot sanctify something that doesn't exist? The whole basis of Reish Lakish's understanding of Rabbi Meir is that if the person was sanctifying something that doesn't exist, that wouldn't work. And so therefore it must be that he's saying that her hands are hektish, but that's not true. Rabbi Meir holds a person is allowed to be makdish davar shelo bali olam. V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa, ha'omer lisha, if a person says to a woman, Hareya mekudeshes li la'achar she'ezgayer, he says, you're going to be married to me, betrothed to me after I convert, or la'achar she'tizgayri, or let's say after you convert, or la'achar she'shtachrer, or after I go free, la'achar she'tishtachreri, or after you go free, la'achar she'yamas balech, after your husband dies, or she'tamas achosech, or after your sister dies. Let's say he's married to her sister, you can't marry two sisters, or la'achar she'yachlotz loch yivamech, or after you have chalitza and I'm able to marry you. In all of those cases, Rabbi Meir Omer mikudeshes. Rabbi Meir says the kedushin works, and these are situations of davar shelo bali olam. The kinyan can't yet take effect, and apparently the kinyan does work. work. And so the Gemara answers that Reish Lakish was saying, Me'ahiyin, that yes, from that brisa that you just quoted, it is true. We do see from a brisa that Rabbi Meir holds a person can be makdish davar shelo bo liolam, but the point of Reish Lakish was, Meha leko l'mashma mina. You can't necessarily learn that from our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, you could give another interpretation, but it is true that Rabbi Meir holds a person is able to be makdish davar shelo bo liolam. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said hamoser when it comes to anything she earns above the requisite amount. Rabbi Meir Omer hektish. Rabbi Meir says it is hektish, and Rabbi Yochanan Asanler says it is not hektish. And the Gemara says emas kadosh. When does it become kadosh? Rav Shmuel Darmei Tarvayu. Rav and Shmuel they both say moser la'achar misa kadosh. That extra amount only becomes kadosh after she dies and he inherits her. Meaning to say that Rav and Shmuel hold when it comes to that extra amount, really she is the one that's entitled to it. That's why it does not become hektish while she's alive. After she dies, then it becomes kadosh. And the Gemara continues, Ravada Barava, Ravada Barava says, no, Moser Mechayim Kadosh. Even when she's alive, still at that point in time, the husband is considered to have reshus over those extra earnings, and therefore it becomes Kadosh even when she is alive. And so the Gemara now says, Heve Borav Papa. Rav Papa asked the following question to try to understand these two opinions. B'mai, what exactly is the case of the Mishnah? If the case is that he's providing her everything he's supposed to provide her, he's providing her mezonos, he's providing her the ma'akesef, so then it doesn't make sense. My time of the mandamar la'achar misa kadosh. What would be the reason of the one who says that it's only kadosh after she dies? It should be kadosh right away, because again, he's entitled to all her earnings. Now again, when it comes to her basic ma'aseh yadayim, you could explain like Rav said earlier, that she could say, Eini nizonos v'eni osa. She could say, I don't want your mezonos, and my earnings, I want to keep the earnings. But that would just be true by the requisite amount. But when you're talking about the moser should certainly go to the husband if he's providing everything that he needs to provide for her. So again, if he's providing everything, why would anyone say that le'achar misa kadosh? And the Gemara says viela, but rather what will you say? Kashein malala mazonos v'lo malala ma'akesef letzorcha. He's not giving her mazonos. He's not giving her the ma'akesef. But if that's the case, then he should not be entitled. So my time of demand mechayim kadosh. What's the reason of the one who says that it's holy while she's alive? Again, in that case, for sure, that should go to her, and therefore it should not be kadosh while she's alive. And so the Gemara answers, Liolam, really the Mishnah is talking, he is giving her mazonos, but he's not giving her the ma'akesef. Rav Shmuel Savri, Tiknu, Rav and Shmuel, they hold that the institution was as follows. We'll take a look at Rashi over here. Liolam b'malala mazonos, the case is where he gives her mazonos, but not the ma'akesef. Rashi points out, you could actually say the reverse also. You could say the case of the Mishnah is where he's not giving her the mazonos, but he's giving her the ma'akesef. The key point is that he's giving her one of the two items. Why is it that the Gemara chooses to say that he's giving her mazonos and not the ma'akesef? Elami Shem Rav. The only reason we're saying that he's giving her the mazonos is because what we said in Rav earlier in the Gemara, because Rav was the one who said, that was Rav Huna Amar Rav, said that a wife can say, I don't want your mazonos, and I want to keep my earnings. That was his explanation of our Mishnah. That's why he explained that the beginning of the Mishnah was talking where the husband is willing to provide mazonos, but she's saying she doesn't want the mazonos and she wants to keep the earnings. So since we already said that in the Reisha, according to Rav, that's why we say the Seifa also is talking about where he's providing mazonos. There was another possible explanation in the Reisha as well. You could say the Reisha is not following Rav, and instead you could say that the Reisha is talking about a situation where he simply doesn't have the ability to provide mazonos, and that's why she keeps her earnings. But in any case, because Rav said that the Mishnah is talking about where he was willing to provide mazonos, and she just refused the mazonos, so therefore that's why the Gemara says in the case of the Seifa as well. He's willing to provide the mazonos, he's malala mazonos, but he's not malala the ma'akesef, and there we have a machlokas amoraim, so does he have the right to the moser while she is alive, or are we talking lachar misa? We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph.